there. I'm Andrew Ferrier with Digital Venture Partners. Myself and one of my partners, Ryan Rappaport, we actually partnered with Chicago Normal for the 420 Virtual Summit with the Chicago Cannabis Health Initiative. So we were actually in communication about putting together a panel with some very accomplished private equity executives, just for the basis of being able to have some conversation around the current state of cannabis, private equity, capital markets, and what the average entrepreneur could expect once trying to pivot into that industry to hopefully maybe raise capital, maybe create relationships or access or resources with these type of companies. So we have two very accomplished, very well-respected executives. I'll let them kind of introduce themselves and the company that they work with. We'll start with Lauren, and then we'll go to Mina.
Thanks, Andrew. Yes, my name is Lauren DeFalco with CB1 Capital. We're an advisory platform managing third-party capital, as well as helping companies navigate the way to work within the industry as an advisory capacity. So anything having to do with cannabis or cannabinoids, we deal with.
I'm Mina Mishriki. I'm senior partner at Merida Capital. We have a very good relationship with CB1 and Lauren's fund. We are also focused on investing in the cannabis space. We are a private equity firm for the most part. Some of our investments have gone public, but focus on making private investments in the cannabis space, and really no limitations in terms of what we'll touch. We started as an ancillary focused fund, meaning investing in businesses that don't touch the plant, and have evolved through our second and third fund to investing directly in operators. So that's a little bit about Merida, and we're based in New York.
Okay, great. So yeah, we'll just start with the obvious elephant in the room, which is the COVID-19 pandemic that we're all kind of facing and trying to adjust towards. So starting with Mina, kind of how has Merida had to adjust trying to do business, stay effective in kind of the face of something that nobody has ever really experienced in our lifetime?
Well, I guess I'll start with our business directly, and then I'll talk a little bit about the industry. For our business, it really hasn't changed much. In fact, we have partners or colleagues all over the United States, and in fact, myself, I live in Philadelphia. I'm from Philly. Our office is in New York. I only get up there once or twice a week, so I'm used to working remotely. I'm on the road a lot, although right now I'm not on the road. And so it's really business as usual in terms of how we operate. I guess the one exception to that is, I think every fund, I think this is true about every fund in this space, but we're always fundraising, and it's a little bit more difficult to fundraise in this environment where you can't meet with people, but hasn't stopped us from trying, at least. But in terms of the industry as a whole, I'll largely defer to Lauren, but I think in some aspects of the industry are actually benefiting from this, much like grocery stores are, and obviously cannabis is essential, and ironic, of course, that it's essential yet illegal. I think in particular in more mature markets, we've seen a short-term spike in sales and then a retreatment. But for the most part, it's business as usual for operators. Obviously, they have to change their operations to adjust in terms of curbside pickup or using delivery a little bit more. There's other aspects of the industry that will certainly get impacted by this. That is negative to the negative. I think some of our portfolio companies that maybe rely on, the good thing about cannabis is it's mostly reliant on a domestic local supply chain, but for some companies that rely on foreign supply chains, there's difficulties there, or sales forces that need to be out in front of people. So nobody's immune to this, other than maybe Zoom. But yeah, that's I guess just a high level view of how this is all affecting us.
Okay. And Lauren, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. The COVID-19 story has, changed everyone's life, and we're all working remotely. The most interesting thing that I've seen is the fact that cannabis is deemed an essential service in these states. And to Mina's point, we saw this hoarding that went on, and if something's being hoarded, it doesn't seem to be discretionary. So, many of us have known this. This is more evidence to support this. The concerns for, capital markets and these operating companies is how long are we really out of work, and does that affect, the ability for people to keep purchasing cannabis, or do they really need to cut back because there's no light at the end of the tunnel? And that remains to be seen, but that's the one caveat to the fact that it's an essential service. At a certain point, people don't have money, it doesn't much matter, but it's very positive considering a year ago we're debating, or this industry was even going to be legitimate at any level, and now you have states saying it's essential. So that to me is the biggest takeaway.
Imminent reset, right? I think a lot of companies a few years ago who were kind of deemed unicorns or real power players within the legal cannabis space are really struggling. And I think I think we all can agree that a lot of them won't weather this phase that we're about to go into, right? So what do you think is essential moving forward post this outbreak that you would like to see companies kind of pivot into or kind of show as a sign of strength that they're going to be able to weather what we're about to head into post-COVID?
So sure. I mean, in terms of, and we've seen these articles last week, extinction level event, companies running out of capital, and we've seen companies adjust some to, lowering CapEx. Any kind of build outs that they were planning on doing for the next 12 months have either been, set aside or delayed. Some companies that are choosing not to are playing with fire if they don't have enough capital to get through this next 12 months. But that's essentially what we've seen is some companies stepping up and saying, we need to make sure to cut these expenses, even though it'll affect our longer term picture, to guarantee that we'll be operating next year. There are wrinkles within this with the lack of bankruptcy solutions for U.S. operators. We've seen some of this in Canada with a couple of companies defaulting and having issues, but in the U.S., there really isn't a mechanism, being that it's federally illegal for this bankruptcy type issue. So,
Mina, do you have anything to add to that?
If you're looking to raise capital, I think it's imperative to have a very clear view of what that path looks like. And, if it takes you, a year or 2 years, it's best to be honest about it. And, but the last thing, you want is to, be aggressive with that assumption.
And I would guess, guys, that obviously given the current state of the market, that there's going to be opportunities as well after this clears up. Where are you guys seeing those opportunities existing in terms of where businesses can maybe even step in or step up?
There's a big opportunity in the long term in the healthcare arena and space. I think a lot of folks are focused on legalization and exits thereafter from big pharma, big alcohol, big tobacco. And there's a lot of opportunity there, but there's definitely a long-term play here in terms of pharma development. Otherwise we tend to focus on businesses in less competitive environments. So think medical markets, again, crossover with my first theme of healthcare. Think East Coast states with less licenses available. And otherwise, I think there's a lot of focus on investing in the next big brands, that there hasn't really been a big brand in the space yet. We're a little bit more shy about playing in that arena because I think it's really hard to pick a winner.
To Mina's point of view, point there about limited license versus unlimited license, we look at this, in a very bifurcated way, where the unlimited license states are almost akin to Canada, where they got ahead of themselves over capacity, some wonderful plans that they designed, but a lack of capital, a lack of affordable capital to drive those plans. And we've seen, the funding dry up, as Mina alluded to before. When we're on lockdown, it's very difficult. So there's opportunities for distressed assets in the CPG world, retail, cultivation, dispensaries. And there's also opportunity to the drug development side, which really hasn't gotten out of the gate yet. And we believe that is, the longer tail. It'll take much longer to develop. So there are opportunities that are starting to show up there. We saw the FDA last week take CBD off of the Schedule 5 that it was. So that is opening up the door to more drug development, as well as possibly CBD being through the retail channel. But for sure, there are those distressed assets that some people are starting to look at, as well as that 3.0 drug development coming.
A lot of people viewing this panel will be, minorities, underfunded entrepreneurs. And I think a really powerful thing about conversations like this is entrepreneurs get an opportunity to kind of hear the perspective of the other side, which we really don't have access to for the most part, especially early on. So what are some of the indicators that you guys would look for, even if you don't invest directly into a startup, but something that kind of shows you like, hey, these guys are on the right path, or there's something to this particular company or business model that you like to see before deploying capital?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we're involved with a group out of Missouri. Actually, probably knows this group out of Missouri. It's a woman-owned cultivation group, and they had to compete with all these other applicants to get their licenses. So it was a little bit different, where some of these other operators in the unlimited license states, where they're maybe developing a brand or so on and so forth. So depending on where you're located, there's different opportunities, and each state really is specific to what kind of social programs are available within the licensing structure. You take Massachusetts with delivery. That was specific to that section. So Illinois has done a great job getting existing operators to work with folks that are trying to smaller licenses to develop their ideas. So a couple different things is trying to maybe form some kind of a loose partnership with somebody who that needs whatever you're producing or developing. Anything that shows that you really have done your work, you've done your research, you've put in a good deck. The first thing that every group looks at is a deck from the operator, understanding what their vision is, how are they going to get there, financial models, and so on and so forth. So that's really like your first impression. So anything that can be done, almost like a resume when you send to an employer, that one deck really carries a lot of weight, because it means to us that you've taken the time out to do things that are, not a lot of fun. You're putting together slides and making sure the information's all concrete and concise. So to me, I think that's one big piece to show that what you're doing is a good deck.
Right. And Mina, last year you guys did the I2 Accelerator, which from my perspective was hugely successful, not even just for the capital that you gave to minority businesses, but just the opportunity to where it allowed us to know that it was there, that companies are paying attention to minorities. How did that process go, and what was the outcome that you can speak about?
Well, thank you for mentioning that. I guess I don't think we met through that actually, and I guess one of the things pieces of advice that I was going to give was the way we met was I reached out to you because I found that you were really thoughtful on social media, and you can tell when folks are at a plane where they're trying to evolve everyone around us and not necessarily just pitching whatever they're into, right? Like, on LinkedIn, for example, everything I post is not about cannabis, for example.
Right.
And so that I always appreciate. And so I just like connecting to people like that. So, and then I think we met through, after I met Andrew. So, and I enjoy your social media presence as well. But more to the point, the accelerator was something that was the brainchild of our managing partner, Mitch Brukowitz. I think it was hugely successful. We had 5 winners to come out of it. And we are working very closely with them. Initially, I think it was meant to be sort of an accelerator, which led to an investment in each of these companies. But I think our intention, and maybe one of the failures of it, was for it to be more of a schooling, where folks would come into our office and spend time with us. It didn't really transpire that way because everyone's just so busy, not just us, but the portfolio companies that won. And so it was more of just a traditional process of funding them and working through their business model and their plans and implementing those business models to Higher Learning, which is an educational company, just launched in Michigan. High Road, which is a delivery technology, which is advantageous right now, just launched in Maryland and Virginia. And I can mention all the winners, but everyone is progressing, and it's great to see. I think we just realized, and it wasn't necessarily in our minds, it wasn't something charitable at all. Frankly, it was. This is a group of business entrepreneurs that haven't been heard, and let's hear their voices. And frankly, our investment process was exactly the same as it is for any other investment we make. We wouldn't have invested in any of these 5 companies if it wasn't an investment that we would have made otherwise, if it wasn't a minority related accelerator. So we look forward to doing it again. I think this COVID crisis may delay the 2020 I2 accelerator to 2021. We'll see. But I think, I think I've said enough for now, but I have, maybe another point to make about the approach that folks should take when they're trying to raise capital.
I would love to hear that. That was actually going to be my next question. Let's say someone does have a valuable model. What advice would you give them before they venture out to try to raise a round of funding if they don't really know too much about what they're about to go through? I would love to have both of you answer that.
I guess I'll start just with the idea at top of mind. I think a couple things. Number one is there's never been a better opportunity to come into the space, to invest in the space. There's a lot of momentum. I think the COVID crisis is actually maybe delaying in the short term some state legalization processes, but I think in general it'll accelerate a lot of the regulatory and political initiatives. So I think that's number one. I think number two is you've had a lot of ups and downs in the industry, and more downs as of late. And it's a great time to learn from some of those downfalls. I think Lauren pointed this out earlier. There's going to be a lot of distressed opportunities. There's also going to be a lot of companies that don't make it, and filling those gaps at this time is going to be a real opportunity. I think on the flip side, capital is really at a premium right now. There's not a lot of it. And so I think it's important to keep in mind, and I think the stark reality is and nobody should take this personally, but it's really hard to raise money right now. Whether it's a company that's coming into the space and they have an idea to apply for a license in Illinois and be an operator in Illinois and apply for a license in leverage, for example, Illinois is one of the model states in terms of implementing social impact aspects to their program, or whether you're a fund like my fund or Lauren's fund. It's really hard for us to raise capital. It's really hard with the capital that we have, which is precious, to pick and choose who to give it to, because everyone really needs capital. And we have a lot of portfolio companies that already exist that we have to effectively, in some respects, prioritize. And so it's hard. And I think that leads to my next point, which is these are very long-term conversations. You're not going to raise money in 1 or 2 months or 3 months. So build relationships. And by building relationships and having these meetings and talking to 5 or 10 or 15 of us and hearing what's wrong and then iterating and improving, you'll get to the point where you've got everything super tight and you'll show that you're really, really thoughtful. So it's really hard. And I guess the last point is, everyone needs money, but realize that the people that you're talking to also are raising money and needing money. And so showing empathy and showing some human connectivity there, I think is something always to keep in mind. Don't assume that everyone's sitting on a big pile of dry powder and just sitting back with their on their throne with their arms behind their heads, looking to deploy capital. It's really hard for everyone. We're all trying to make it. This is a startup industry.
That's funny because that's exactly what I thought when I started.
Yeah.
You see these numbers about these companies raising $200 million for a fund, so you're thinking they're just ready to give away $200 million. So.
Well, and you made a really good point too, Mina, that it's about the relationships as well. And I talked to one of the I2 Accelerator graduates, and he said, the best thing I got out of it were the connections and the conversations. And, the people who were probably getting the most out of it were the people who were making it the most out of those relationships, making them regular conversations, making them conversations of value. So it was really good to hear you mention that too.
Yeah. And a lot of the people that didn't win, we stay in touch with. And, sometimes the best approach isn't give me your money. Sometimes the best approach is, what can I do to leverage this relationship to maybe lead to a connection elsewhere with one of your portfolio companies or an idea to pivot to. So,
Lauren, I'd love to have you touch on that also. Like, what advice would you give to a young startup looking to raise capital for the first time?
Sure. I think Mina probably answered it perfectly. The parts that I would add is, try to understand where there's a gap in our sector and how you can fill that gap. I mean, we have a lot of people showing us the same thing over and over. I've got this idea, and it's the 30th time I've seen that idea in the last week. So find a way to differentiate yourself and your idea. Give you an example. There's a company that we're involved with right now that's guaranteeing and ensuring the supply chain for CBD. I don't see anyone else really doing that out there. So any way to differentiate yourself, being unique, to catch somebody's eye, and understanding your subject matter inside and out. I mean, it goes a long way when you can answer anything about a situation that, we might not know about. And we're asking because we're trying to understand. So knowing your information inside and out, but I think Mina probably pretty much answered everything perfectly there for the other parts.
Perfect. I just have 2 questions. They're kind of offshoots, and then I'll be good unless Ryan has something else. Earlier, Lauren, you said a term that kind of piqued my interest. You said affordable capital. What exactly does that mean to someone who may not understand what that is?
So when we look at, the cost of capital right now, the debt raises that, you mentioned for $200 million. I think the best rate we've seen in the space is close to 13%. That's the best rate, for fixed income for debt. So, we've seen range 15 to 30%. So it's prohibitive. If you don't have outsized margins, it's a really difficult way to operate. So, making sure that however you get your capital, that it's as cheap as you can get it. And it's a little more complicated than what I'm saying, but it's just an expensive proposition right now in our industry because it's illegal. There isn't the normal banking solutions available to us that would be available to every other industry. So you have to be creative at times. You have to be very careful on how you plan on outlaying the capital you do get. But again, when I speak to that, it's the outsized cost that our industry is dealing with. And Mina, I think mentioned before that there's this chance of banking going through with COVID, which is possible because the issue of cash and how cash is transmitting. Maybe that finally gets people to realize they need to make that change. But until that happens, and I don't even know if right away you'll get any serious changes in that. It'll take time as institutions adopt it. But that's the biggest problem in the industry right now is the outsized cost of capital.
So let's say I ignore that, right? What if I hear what you're saying and I still take on debt that may not be in my best interest long term? What are some of the consequences that you've seen once a company may sign on to taking like bad capital, so to speak?
Well, they can't pay it back. Their models don't come to fruition. They've outlaid a revenue model that doesn't work, and all of a sudden they can't pay that balloon payment on that debt. That's it's happened a lot, and you just got to be very careful right now.
I think on the one, just to add, I think on the one hand, debt should be thought of as an instrument for more developed businesses. On the one hand, it's nice because you don't have to give up ownership of your company. On the other hand, if things go wrong, then you lose your company very quickly, and more quickly than you would just raising equity. And I think the other point I want to make is just, obviously people need capital to build their businesses, but one thing to keep in mind is you don't want to raise too much capital, and you want to raise what you need, and you don't want to raise more than that, and you want to think in terms of milestones. This capital will take me to being cash flow neutral. This capital will take me to commercialization. And thinking ahead about the story of your next fundraise. And this is what I did with my cash that I got on my last fundraise. These were my goals. These were the goals I hit. I cleared my milestones. Now I'm looking for more cash to take it to the next level and being very reasonable about that story. If you can show folks that you've thought ahead about the process, then that will bode very well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So
I guess the last point is raising too much capital is not really a problem right now, but it has been a problem in the past.
Right. Okay. So last question that I would have, a lot of entrepreneurs would love to get in a room with you guys or really be able to have these conversations one-on-one, right? Are there any particular conferences, meetups, or industry events that you would recommend that has really been effective in letting entrepreneurs create relationships with you, your colleagues, or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Benzinga has been a great conference for people to go to interact with folks. I think there's a few others that I've been to, MJ Biz, I think, I forget who else. And any of those conferences are great ways to meet people. I personally think, and beyond that, of course, with COVID right now, it's really difficult, but getting involved with local groups, lobbying groups, anything that gives you connections to other people to develop, that's kind of the way I'm thinking about that.
Yeah, I think if you're new to the industry, I think most big cities will have a conference. I know, for example, in Chicago, ArcView has a big presence, and ArcView, by the way, is a great platform to get familiar with. It's sort of an angel investing platform. They're doing a lot of Zoom interactions right now. So ArcView, I would definitely keep in mind. If you're new to the industry, Lauren mentioned this, but there's nothing more impactful than I think the biggest conference of the year by far is MJ Biz, which is in November, December timeframe in Las Vegas. Of course, the future of, at least in the short term, of big conferences is up in the air, but there's a lot of online opportunities right now that are popping up. One of our portfolio companies is a data company called New Frontier. They've been doing Zoom conferences, so get on their mailing list. Another that's a little bit more with a little bit more of a regional, local focus that I know of is Cannagather. So those are a few.
Okay, great. The reason I asked that is I'm sure we can all agree a lot of new conferences that I think a new business model has been trying to monetize the entrepreneur, which I don't think is healthy long term for us, for anyone. So I love to hear you guys' perspective on what actually works, where people actually should be, or where they should invest their time to, you know, buy a ticket or book a hotel, things like that.
Yeah, I would stay local if you can.
Yeah, to Mina's point, local obviously right now is better. I know there's a lot of local normal chapters, you know, that probably are good to get involved with. But any local conference.
The last thing I would add is that I think you guys did a really good job touching on those local events and how important they are. And I think I would just add to that the sense of community that happens at those events and people supporting each other. And I think we see it from the bottom line all the way to the top where you guys are at. So appreciate that insight there.
Definitely want to genuinely thank you guys for coming on, taking the time out of your day to give us this insight and information. I think it's very valuable and very comprehensive. I think someone can really take what you're saying and apply it to their business and see real results within a reasonable amount of time. So Mina, Lauren, we genuinely appreciate you guys at Normal and at Digital Ventures.